The call came just after midnight. No warning, no time to prepare. One moment, the house in Los Angeles was silent. The kind of silence that follows a long day under the harsh lights of fame. The next moment, chaos. Jennifer Lopez collapsed. At first, no one understood what had happened. One of the assistants thought she had simply fainted. Another ran for water. But when Ben Affleck rushed into the room, he knew immediately something was terribly wrong. Her body was still. Too still. Her breathing had turned shallow, uneven. The fragile rhythm of someone standing on the edge of something dangerous. "Call an ambulance," Ben shouted, his voice breaking in a way the world had never heard before. For decades, Jennifer Lopez had been the image of strength. The woman who could dance for hours under blinding stage lights. The woman who had conquered Hollywood, music, fashion, business, a symbol of resilience that seemed almost indestructible. But that night, on the cold marble floor of their home, she looked frighteningly fragile. Minutes later, paramedics burst through the doors. Machines appeared. Voices overlapped. Someone mentioned the word stroke. The word hung in the air like thunder. Ben Affleck stood frozen, watching as the woman who had once filled stadiums with energy was placed onto a stretcher, her long hair falling across the white sheets. Her eyes were closed, and they would not open. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens screamed through the empty streets of Los Angeles. Inside the vehicle, doctors moved quickly, their hands working with mechanical precision. A monitor began to beep, each sound marking the fragile boundary between life and something darker. Ben followed in another car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed everything. Their wedding, their laughter, the way Jennifer used to sing quietly in the kitchen when she thought no one was listening. And suddenly, a terrifying thought pushed its way into his mind. What if that voice disappeared? At the hospital, the atmosphere changed immediately. Bright lights, fast footsteps, a hallway that seemed too long. Jennifer Lopez was rushed into the emergency room while a team of specialists gathered around her. Ben was stopped at the door. "Sir, you can't come in." He watched as the doors closed in front of him. Just like that, the most powerful woman in entertainment vanished behind a wall of steel and silence. Hours passed. No one spoke much in the waiting room. A nurse eventually approached Ben with a careful expression. The kind that doctors and nurses learn after years of delivering news that no one wants to hear. "There are complications," she said quietly. Ben felt the room tilt. "What kind of complications?" he asked. The nurse hesitated, then the words came out slowly. They found something else. At first, the doctors believed the stroke had been caused by extreme exhaustion. Jennifer Lopez had been working relentlessly. Recording sessions, film negotiations, business meetings that stretched late into the night. But the scans told another story. A darker one. Further tests revealed the truth that no one had expected. Jennifer Lopez was battling advanced cancer. Stage 4. The words fell into the room like stones. Even the doctors seemed uneasy saying them out loud. For a moment, Ben Affleck said nothing. He just stared at the medical chart in the doctor's hands. Stage 4. How could this happen to someone who had spent her entire life radiating strength? "How long has she known?" Ben asked quietly. The doctor shook his head. "We don't believe she knew." That answer made everything worse. Because it meant Jennifer had been performing, smiling, appearing on red carpets, all while her body was quietly fighting a battle she didn't even know existed. And now, after the stroke, that battle had become even more dangerous. The doctor's voice became more serious. "Right now, the next 24 hours are critical." Ben leaned forward. "What do you mean, critical?" "There's a risk she may not wake up." Silence swallowed the room. For the first time in years, Ben Affleck, the actor who had played heroes, detectives, and even Batman, looked completely powerless. He stood up abruptly. "I need to see her." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. When Ben finally entered the hospital room, the machines were the first thing he noticed. Monitors? Pipes. the soft mechanical sound of life being measured second by second. Jennifer Lopez lay in the center of it all, motionless. Her face looked pale under the hospital lights, a stark contrast to the glamorous image the world had always known. Ben slowly walked toward the bed. He took her hand. It was warm, but weak. "Jen," he whispered. No response. For years, the world had watched their love story, the reunion of a relationship that had once seemed impossible. Fans called them a miracle, a second chance written by fate. But now fate seemed to be writing something else. Ben lowered his head. The room was quiet except for the slow beeping of the heart monitor. Then his voice broke. "Please, you have to wake up. No cameras, no red carpets, no audience. Just a husband sitting beside the woman he loved, begging the silence to give her back." Outside the room, doctors were still debating the next step. Aggressive treatment, emergency procedures, experimental options. Inside, Ben remained beside her bed, waiting. And somewhere in the hospital corridors, one doctor quietly admitted something that no one dared say out loud. "This case is far more dangerous than we expected." The hospital room was filled with a quiet that felt almost unnatural. Not the peaceful silence of rest, but the kind of silence that stretches every second into something heavier. Ben Affleck sat beside the bed and watched the small green line on the monitor rise and fall, again and again. Each soft beep sounded louder than it should have, echoing through the room like a fragile reminder that Jennifer Lopez was still here, still fighting. Her hand rested in his. It was strange how small it suddenly felt. For years, those hands had commanded stadiums. They had gripped microphones under blinding lights, waved to crowds that roared her name, reached for dancers during explosive performances. Those same hands had signed contracts worth millions, lifted awards, and held the faces of her children with tenderness. Now they lay still against the white hospital sheet. A thin plastic band circled her wrist, printed with her name, Jennifer Lynn Lopez. Ben stared at the letters longer than necessary, as if reading them again might somehow change the reality of the room. Across the bed, a nurse adjusted one of the machines. The sound of soft buttons being pressed broke the silence for a moment. "Her vitals are stable for now," the nurse said gently. Ben nodded, but the words didn't settle inside him. Stable. It was a strange word. It sounded hopeful, yet fragile at the same time, like a bridge that might hold or might collapse. He leaned closer to Jennifer. Her hair had been pushed back from her face by the nurses, revealing the faint lines near her eyes. Lines that had only appeared in the last few years, after decades of relentless work. People always spoke about Jennifer Lopez as if she were unstoppable, a global icon, a woman who never slowed down. But sitting here now, Ben suddenly remembered the smaller moments the world never saw. The quiet mornings, Jennifer standing barefoot in the kitchen, humming softly while making coffee. The way she sometimes paused in the middle of rehearsals and rubbed the back of her neck, pretending she wasn't tired. The nights she stayed awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep, scrolling through music ideas on her phone. She never liked admitting weakness, even when her body was trying to warn her. Ben remembered something else now. A night only a few months earlier. Jennifer had come home late from a recording session. She had walked into the living room slowly, dropping her bag on the sofa. "Long day?" he had asked. She smiled. That familiar, effortless smile the world knew so well. "Just tired," she said. Then she sat beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. At the time, it had felt like nothing. Just another quiet moment in a busy life. But now, sitting in this hospital room, the memory returned with a sharp edge. Had that been the first sign? Had her body already been fighting something terrible while she kept smiling for the cameras? The thought tightened in Ben's chest. A faint movement pulled him back to the present. Jennifer's fingers twitched slightly under his hand, so small that someone else might not have noticed. But Ben did. His head lifted instantly. "Jen?" he whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. The machines continued their steady rhythm. But then, again, her fingers moved. Just a little. Hope rushed through him so suddenly it almost hurt. He leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Jennifer, can you hear me?" The room seemed to hold its breath. The faint glow of the monitor lights reflected across the white walls. Outside the door, footsteps passed down the hallway. Inside the room, time slowed. Jennifer's eyelids fluttered slightly. Not fully opening, just enough to reveal the smallest sign that somewhere inside, she was still there. Ben felt his throat tighten. For the first time since the night had begun, his eyes filled with tears he could no longer hide. "You scared me," he whispered. His voice was barely louder than the machine's. "You scared all of us." He gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Her skin felt warm, but fragile, like someone who had spent too long fighting something invisible. For a long moment, Jennifer did not move again, but her breathing changed, slightly deeper now, as if her body was slowly remembering how to return. Ben remained beside her, studying every tiny detail the way someone studies a fragile miracle. The rise of her chest, the faint movement of her lips, the small crease between her eyebrows that always appeared when she was concentrating. It was strange how those little things suddenly meant everything. In the world outside this hospital room, Jennifer Lopez was a legend, a performer, a star who had conquered decades of fame. But here, beneath the quiet lights of the hospital, she was something else entirely. Just a woman, a wife, a mother, someone fighting quietly for another chance to breathe. Ben tightened his grip on her hand, and for the first time since the terrible night began, he allowed himself to believe, just slightly, that maybe the story was not over yet. But outside the room, the doctors were still studying the scans, and one of them slowly shook his head. The hospital corridor outside Jennifer Lopez's room was unusually quiet. Too quiet for a place where lives were constantly hanging between hope and loss. A few nurses walked past with careful steps, their shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. Somewhere in the distance, a trolley rolled by. The wheels squeaked briefly, and then disappeared again into the long white hallway. Inside the room, the lights had been dimmed. Ben Affleck had not moved from the chair beside the bed. Hours had passed. No one had asked him to leave. No one had told him anything new. And that silence was beginning to feel heavier than any words. Jennifer lay exactly where the doctors had left her, surrounded by machines that whispered their quiet rhythm into the night. The monitor beside her bed continued its steady beeping, but the sound felt strangely distant now, like something happening in another world. Ben watched her face carefully. Every few minutes he leaned closer, studying the smallest movements. Her breathing, the faint tremble of her eyelids, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. It was impossible to know what was happening inside her mind, or if she was aware of anything at all. At one point, a nurse entered the room to check the IV line. She adjusted the drip and wrote something quickly on a small chart. Ben noticed the hesitation in her movements. Just for a second, as if she wanted to say something but decided not to. "Is she improving?" he asked quietly. The nurse looked up at him. Her expression remained professional, but there was something uncertain behind her eyes. "We're still monitoring her," she replied. "Still monitoring." Another careful answer. Another sentence that revealed almost nothing. When she left, the room returned to its strange stillness. Ben leaned back in the chair and rubbed his face with both hands. His beard had grown rough during the long hours, and the exhaustion in his eyes was impossible to hide. The truth was, no one had explained everything yet. Not completely. The doctors had mentioned the stroke. They had spoken about the cancer, but something about the situation still felt incomplete. Earlier that evening, Ben had overheard two doctors talking quietly near the nurse's station. They had lowered their voices when they noticed him approaching, but not quickly enough. "The scans don't match," one of them had said. "Exactly," the other replied. "That's what worries me." Ben had stopped walking when he heard that. Scans don't match. What did that even mean? Later, when he asked one of the specialists about it, The doctor had simply adjusted his glasses and said, "We are reviewing everything carefully. Reviewing everything carefully." Another answer that revealed nothing. Back inside the hospital room, Ben reached for Jennifer's hand again. Her skin still felt warm, but there was something fragile about the way her fingers rested in his palm. He remembered another moment suddenly, something small, almost forgotten. 2 weeks ago, Jennifer had been rehearsing for a performance. The music was loud, the dancers were moving around her in perfect rhythm. But halfway through the routine, she had stopped suddenly. Just stopped. Everyone had looked at her. "You okay?" one of the dancers had asked. Jennifer had nodded quickly. "Just dizzy for a second," she said. Then she laughed. The rehearsal continued. No one questioned it. Jennifer Lopez had always pushed through pain. But now that memory returned with an uncomfortable weight. What if that moment had meant more than they realized? Ben looked toward the window. Outside, Los Angeles stretched endlessly under the dark sky. The city lights flickered like distant stars. Millions of people were still awake out there. Driving, talking, living ordinary lives. None of them knew that one of the most famous women in the world was lying silently in a hospital bed only a few floors above them. And none of them knew the truth the doctors were still trying to understand. The door to the room opened quietly. A senior doctor stepped inside. He was older than the others, his face lined with the kind of experience that comes from decades of medicine. Ben immediately stood up. "Is there news?" The doctor paused. For a moment, he looked at Jennifer rather than Ben. Then he walked slowly toward the bed and studied the monitor readings. His expression changed slightly. Not fear. Not relief either. Something more complicated. "We're still trying to understand what happened tonight," he said carefully. Ben frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor folded his arms. "The stroke is real. The cancer diagnosis is also real." Ben's heart tightened again. "But?" he asked. The doctor hesitated, just long enough for the silence to grow uncomfortable. "There are other signals in the scans that don't fully match the progression we expected." Ben stared at him. "I don't understand." "Neither do we," the doctor admitted quietly. For a moment, no one spoke. The machines continued their slow rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Finally, Ben asked the question that had been growing inside him all night. "Are you saying something else is wrong?" The doctor looked at Jennifer again. Then he lowered his voice slightly. "We are not ruling anything out yet." It was not the answer Ben wanted, but it was the only one he was given. After a few minutes, the doctor left the room, and the silence returned once again. Ben sat back down slowly. He studied Jennifer's face under the dim light. The world knew her as a superstar, a performer who seemed larger than life. But here, beneath the soft hospital lights, she looked almost peaceful, almost as if she were simply sleeping. Still, something about the room felt unsettled, something unspoken. And deep in the hallway outside, 2 doctors were still standing beside a computer screen, staring at the newest scan that had just appeared. One of them whispered something. The other looked up in disbelief. Then both of them fell silent. Night settled deeper over the hospital. The windows of the building reflected the distant lights of Los Angeles, stretching endlessly toward the dark hills. Cars moved like slow streams of white and red far below, their quiet motion continuing as if nothing unusual had happened. Inside the hospital room, time felt different. Slower, thicker. Ben Affleck had not left the chair beside Jennifer Lopez's bed for hours. The fabric of the chair had begun to crease under his weight, and the dim overhead lamp cast long shadows across the pale walls. The machines continued their soft, steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound that refused to disappear. Jennifer lay motionless beneath the thin white blanket. The rise and fall of her chest was faint but visible. Her long hair rested across the pillow, darker now under the soft hospital light. Without makeup, without stage lights, without the roar of stadium crowds, she looked almost unfamiliar. Just a woman resting between breaths. Ben leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes had grown red from exhaustion, but he still watched her carefully. as if any moment she might open her eyes and say something that would return the world to normal. But the room remained quiet. At some point during the night, a nurse entered to check the monitors. She adjusted the IV bag and scribbled something quickly on a chart before leaving again without a word. The door closed softly behind her. Ben glanced toward it for a moment, then looked back at Jennifer. He noticed something small. Her eyelashes trembled slightly. It was so subtle that it might have been nothing. Just a reflex. Just the body responding to sleep. Still, Ben leaned closer. "Jen," he murmured. His voice was barely audible. Her eyelids did not open, but the faint tremor appeared again. For a moment, hope flickered quietly in the room. Then the machines continued their slow rhythm, unchanged. Beep, beep, beep. Ben slowly leaned back again, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside the room, the hallway lights had dimmed for the late hours. A cleaning cart rolled slowly past, pushed by a worker who hummed quietly to himself. Further down the corridor, two doctors stood beside a glowing computer screen. One of them zoomed in on the scan again. The other shook his head slightly. The image on the monitor showed something small, something difficult to interpret. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, one doctor whispered, almost to himself, "That shouldn't be there." The other doctor glanced toward Jennifer's room at the far end of the hallway, but he didn't reply. Back inside the room, Ben rubbed his eyes again. Fatigue was beginning to press down on him, heavy and unavoidable. He rested his hand gently on Jennifer's again. Her fingers were still warm, still fragile. He traced the edge of the hospital bracelet around her wrist without thinking. Jennifer Lynn Lopez. The name looked strange in this room, a name known across the world, a name that had filled arenas and movie theaters for decades. Yet tonight, it existed quietly on a thin strip of plastic under fluorescent light. Ben lowered his head slightly. For a long time he simply sat there, listening to the soft sounds of the machines and the distant movement of the hospital at night. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang briefly. A nurse answered it. A door opened. A door closed. Life continued in small, ordinary movements. Inside the room, nothing changed. Or maybe something did. Ben looked up suddenly. Jennifer's breathing had shifted again. Not dramatically, just slightly deeper than before. Her fingers twitched faintly in his hand. He froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Jennifer?" he whispered. No answer. Her face remained still. The machines continued their rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. For a moment, it was impossible to tell whether the movement had meant anything at all. Outside the window, a faint gray line began to appear on the horizon as the first hint of morning approached. Los Angeles was slowly waking up. Traffic would return soon. Cameras, news, questions. But none of that had reached the quiet hospital room yet. Ben remained beside the bed, watching Jennifer's face as the soft light of early dawn began to creep across the floor. Her breathing continued, slow, uncertain, and somewhere down the hallway, one of the doctors was still staring at the scan on the screen, without saying a word.